She was raising her barn one beam at a time. Unaware the Amish man watching was a widower longing for a family. Lancaster County, late afternoon in early November 1881. Snow clung to the branches of oak and maple, blanketing the farmland in a hush only God's country could know. The skeleton of a small barn stood half-finished, its timber walls rough but steady. Wind whispered through the gaps in the wood, carrying the scent of fresh sawdust in winter's approach. "Sister, I thought this place was abandoned, but clearly I was wrong." The voice came from the dirt road, low and calm with the gentle cadence of a man who had spent years in prayer and silence. Eleanor Sullivan straightened slowly, one hand braced against her lower back, the other gripping the handle of her hammer. She turned to find a man in a buggy watching her from just beyond the fence line, his black horse pawing at the frosted ground. Eleanor's heart kicked against her ribs. She had not seen another soul in over a week, not since the Miller family brought her a basket of preserves and a warning about early snow. Her eyes narrowed. "This land is mine. If you're lost, head back east. There's nothing for you here." The man adjusted his broad-brimmed hat. "I mean no trouble, just checking on neighbors along the valley. Name's Samuel Yoder. My family's farm is 10 miles north." He paused, eyes flicking from the half-built barn to the worn gloves on her hands. "Didn't expect to find someone building alone." Eleanor's gaze didn't soften. "I prefer it that way." Samuel climbed down from the buggy with practiced ease. He led the horse a few steps closer, but kept a respectful distance, boots crunching lightly over frozen grass. "No offense meant, just most women don't do this kind of work." He glanced at the wall frame, then at her belly. "Especially not in your condition. I didn't come here to fit most women's ways." Eleanor lifted the hammer again, struck a nail with sure, even force. Her breath steamed in the cold air. "I came here to start over." Samuel watched her a moment longer, then stepped back, raising both hands slightly as if to show he held no threat. "Fair enough, just thought you might need help with something heavy. Carrying a child and raising a barn at the same time, that takes strength given by the Lord." "I've got strength. What I don't have is time for charity." She turned, lifting another timber into place. Her movement was slower now, heavier with the child growing beneath her ribs, but she didn't waver. "So if you're offering pity, take it back to your community." Samuel studied her. There was defiance in her posture, yes, but something else too, weariness hidden behind pride. He didn't see a woman breaking. He saw a woman holding everything together with nothing but will. "Not pity," he said finally, "just respect." Eleanor didn't respond at first. She hammered in silence until the plank held fast. Then she looked at him, truly looked. The man had the bearing of someone raised in simplicity and faith, but there were lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of loss. His plain clothes were clean, but his hands were calloused, and there was something in his expression, a flicker of something she hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. "I've had enough of people who want to fix things," she said, her voice softer now. "I'm not broken, just building." Samuel nodded. "Understood." He climbed back onto his buggy, but before turning back to the road, he hesitated. "If you change your mind, if you ever need anything, the Yoder farm ain't far. We help all neighbors, English or not." Eleanor didn't answer. She watched as he drove off, disappearing down the winding road. Only when he was gone did she lean against the half-built wall and exhale. The child inside her stirred, a soft flutter low in her belly. She pressed a hand to it, eyes still on the place where he'd vanished. "That's not the kind of man who passes through by accident," she murmured. And though she wouldn't admit it aloud, her heart had stirred too. Not with fear, but with something that frightened her more. Hope. 3 days later, the morning sun hung low, casting long shadows across the frozen fields. Eleanor stood at the base of her half-finished barn, a beam of rough-hewn oak balanced awkwardly against her shoulder. Her lower back throbbed with every breath, her fingers stiff from cold and labor. The baby had shifted lower in the past week, bringing with it a new heaviness that made each task feel like a mountain. Still she worked. She had to. She had driven the foundation stakes herself, hauled each timber from the sawmill with only a borrowed cart and grit. Her food stores were packed tight in the root cellar, and her chimney now pulled cleanly with smoke. But the walls weren't done, and the snow whispered of coming harder days. She set the beam down with a grunt, breath catching as a sharp ache lanced across her side. "You're pushing too hard." The voice, deep and familiar, startled her. She spun, heart leaping, only to find Samuel Yoder standing beside his buggy at the edge of her property. He held a basket in his arms, covered with a checkered cloth. He looked less formal today, work clothes dusted with a flour, suspenders worn from use. Eleanor tightened her grip on the hammer. "I didn't ask for company." "No," he said gently, "but I figured I'd come anyway." He took a slow step forward and placed the basket atop a stump. "My sister Ruth sent this. Bread, apple butter, and some baby clothes she made. Said you'd probably pretend not to need them, but to bring them anyway." Eleanor stared at the basket, not moving. Samuel glanced at her barn. "Wall's coming along. You've done all this yourself?" She gave a curt nod. "Every nail. Impressive." He looked at her belly, then at her hands. "Painful too, I imagine." Eleanor folded her arms, bracing herself against the cold and something warmer she didn't want to feel. "Why are you really here, Mr. Yoder? Checking on the Englishwoman? Gathering stories to tell at Sunday meeting?" Samuel's gaze didn't flinch. "I came because I wanted to, and because I don't like the thought of you working through the pain alone when it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not a charity case. I never said you were." She stepped forward, voice tight. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through. Men like you offer help like it's some kind of blessing, but it always comes with a price. Expectations. Judgments." He didn't speak at first, just let her words hang there in the morning frost. Then softly, "Some people offer help not because they think you're weak, but because they admire your strength." Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. Samuel continued, quieter now. "I've seen a lot of people fold under less than what you're carrying. But here you are, building something real, alone with no one watching, no one clapping. That's not weakness. That's rare." She swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "I don't belong to your world." "Maybe not," he said. "But you're my neighbor. And where I come from, that means something." He nodded once, turned and walked back toward his buggy. She watched him go, her pulse louder than the wind. When he vanished down the road, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She moved to the stump and opened the cloth. Inside were 3 tiny quilted garments, hand-stitched with care, and jars of preserves that smelled of cinnamon and home. For the first time since she'd arrived in Lancaster County, something in her chest cracked. Not enough to fall apart, just enough to feel. 1 week later, the wind had picked up again, slipping through the cracks in the unfinished barn walls, rattling loose nails like bones in a sack. Eleanor sat beside the small stove she'd installed, her hands red from handling lumber, her breath clouding in front of her face. Samuel knelt across from her, setting another beam near the growing stack. They had worked all morning side by side, no declarations, no unnecessary words, just the rhythm of hammers and the occasional breathless laugh when a board refused to fit and splintered in protest. He handed her a mason jar of water. She took it without hesitation now. "This barn will be twice the size of what you started," he said, wiping sawdust from his sleeves. "I had to expand," she replied, staring at the framework taking shape. "I didn't have the luxury of waiting for someone else to save me." He sat beside her, adjusting his hat. She did not look at him when she spoke next. "I was married in Philadelphia. Proper ceremony, white dress, church bells, the whole show. He walked out 6 months later. Said the child wasn't his." Samuel turned his head slowly, his eyes unreadable. "I never told him the truth," Eleanor continued, "that the child was his, that the dates lined up. Didn't see the point. He left before I could even say the words." Silence pressed between them. She exhaled. "The divorce papers, they were never filed, not fully. Legally, I'm still his wife." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "That's a heavy burden to carry." Eleanor let her gaze fall to the boards beneath them. "It's not something I lead with. Out here, people already look at me like I'm damaged goods. Adding legally married doesn't exactly inspire confidence." Samuel gave a quiet nod. "People are quick to judge what they don't understand." She glanced sideways. "You haven't asked if I still love him." No, he said softly. I figure if you did, you wouldn't be here. She blinked once, then twice. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. What about you? She asked, voice barely above the wind. You don't strike me as the type who lives alone, just for the peace and quiet. He looked toward the rolling fields. Her name was Mary, my wife. We married young, as is our way. She took ill with fever 3 winters ago. The English doctor couldn't help. Our faith couldn't save her. I held her hand as she passed. Eleanor's heart stilled. I was 31. Since then I work, I pray, I keep to myself. Not because I'm afraid to love again, just didn't see God's plan in it anymore. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. So am I, he said, but I'm still here and so are you. The wind howled outside, snow spiraling in bursts across the barn's open doorway. They worked a few hours more. He cut boards for the roof frame while she measured lengths for the door. Their movements found a kind of harmony neither of them commented on, as if speaking it would break the spell. When the sun dipped behind the hills, casting long violet shadows across the valley, they sat again, this time on the half-finished barn floor. Eleanor wrapped her shawl around her belly, her gloved hands trembling slightly from exertion. Samuel offered his coat. She refused it, but after a beat, she said quietly, It feels safer to do everything alone, but maybe it's just lonelier. Samuel looked at her, not with pity, not with possession, just something steadier, warmer. Maybe, he said, and the wind for once passed softly through the timber walls, as if deciding for that moment not to push them apart. Late autumn wind curling through the valley, bringing whispers with it. By the time the first frost glazed the corn stubble around Eleanor's property, the wind carried more than just cold. It carried voices, fragments of rumors laced with curiosity and judgment, drifting into town with every passing wagon. They talked about the English woman alone on the edge of Amish country, too proud to accept charity, too stubborn to fit into society's mold. But more than that, they talked about the visits, about Samuel Yoder, about a respected Amish widower seen too often driving his buggy south, staying too long near a half-built barn, and a woman who wore her shame like armor. Eleanor had heard whispers at the general store in bird in hand when she traded eggs for flour. The clerk's polite smile was tight-lipped now. The Miller family, kind as they'd been, had grown cautious, their questions more clipped. She pretended not to notice. Until one cold morning, with the ground hard beneath her boots and the air sharp with wood smoke and secrets, a buggy she did not recognize rolled onto her property. The woman who stepped down moved like someone raised to rule a household. Her cape dress was pristine black wool, her bonnet strings perfectly tied, her posture rigid with authority. Miss Sullivan, the woman said crisply, smoothing her apron as she surveyed the modest farmhouse. I am Rebecca Stoltzfus, Samuel's sister-in-law. I imagine my name has reached you, if not formally. Eleanor did not speak at first. She straightened, placing her hand instinctively over her swelling belly. I know of you, she replied, voice calm. Rebecca's gaze swept over the barn, the sawdust, the unpainted walls. Then it settled on Eleanor. Then I will be brief. This arrangement, whatever it is between you and Samuel, needs to end. Eleanor lifted her chin. There is no arrangement. Then end the association. He visits often, people talk. His standing in the church is being questioned, his faithfulness to our ways doubted. I never asked him to come. But you never sent him away either, did you? Rebecca's smile was tight, brittle. You let him stay. You let him help. And now the elders are wondering if he's straying from the faith for an English woman carrying another man's child. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her voice held steady. He's a grown man, Mrs. Stoltzfus. I have not seduced him, nor do they seek to convert him or pull him from your community. No, just his attention, his time, his reputation. Rebecca stepped forward. You think I am heartless, that I do not understand hardship, but I do. What I do not accept is allowing a scandal to grow while a good man loses his standing in the only community he's ever known. Eleanor felt her nails dig into her palms. I built this barn alone, she said, split my own firewood, sewed clothes for a child who will never know the comfort of legitimacy. I've asked nothing of Samuel but neighborly kindness. I've kept to myself. Not enough, Rebecca snapped. because your presence still draws him, and your situation lets the community imagine the worst. She drew a breath, cold mist curling from her lips. Leave, sell the land, go back to the English world where you belong, but do not stay here, not where he can see you, not where his faith is being tested with every visit. Eleanor felt the heat rise in her face. You do not own him. But I know how our world works, Rebecca said. Amish men might admire strength, might feel called to help, but they marry within the faith. They choose the path God has laid for them. She stepped back. Make it easier on him, on all of us. For sure. Before this ends with him under the ban. When the buggy wheels vanished down the road and the silence returned, Eleanor stood unmoving. The cold bit through her shawl, her breath came ragged. Later, she would sweep the porch, restack the lumber Samuel had cut last week. She would make a tea and feel the baby kick beneath her ribs. But for now, she stood in that doorway, her body aching and her heart heavier than any timber beam she'd lifted. She looked out into the farmland that had become her only refuge. Then she whispered to no one, Am I destroying the only good man who ever looked at me without pity? Early winter, snowfall steady, the earth hushed beneath a quilt of white. The storm came quietly but steady. Snow clung to the fence posts like lacework, and the chimney smoke curled in silence above Eleanor's farmhouse. She sat by the stove, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. It had been days since Rebecca Stoltzfus's visit, days since those sharp words had carved through her defenses and left behind something far more dangerous than fear. Doubt. Each time the wind whistled through the eaves, she braced for another confrontation. For Samuel to arrive with disappointment in his eyes or resignation in his voice. But when he did come, he brought neither. The sound of buggy wheels reached her ears before the knock did. Deliberate, familiar. She opened the door before he could raise his hand. Snowflakes scattered off his shoulders and the brim of his hat. His coat was dusted and white, his cheeks red from cold and conviction. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and calm, I need to talk to you. She stepped aside. You shouldn't be here. I should be exactly here, he answered, stepping inside. The fire flickered against his features as he removed his gloves. His movements were different now, no hesitation, no polite uncertainty, just resolve. She stood near the stove, arms folded over her belly, as if trying to shield both herself and the life inside from what was coming. I spoke with the elders, he began, told them I would continue to help you as any neighbor should, that Christian charity doesn't end at the edges of our community. Eleanor's breath caught. They were not pleased, Samuel said simply. They reminded me of our ways, of the importance of staying separate from the world. But I told them something else too. Samuel, she began, but he raised a hand. I told them that I see God's hand in this, that maybe he brought you here not to test my faith, but to strengthen it, to remind me that love and kindness don't always follow the paths we expect. He stepped closer, his voice gentling. This is not about rebellion or some romantic fancy. This is about choosing what is right. You need help. That child needs shelter. And he paused. I've seen more of God's grace in the way you refuse to give up than I have in years of Sunday meetings. Eleanor blinked, her throat tightening. You cannot risk your standing for me, she whispered. I'm not risking anything, he replied. I'm following what I believe the Lord wants, to help the widow and the orphan, even if they're not quite either. A long silence filled the space between them. Only the stove crackled softly. Eleanor turned her face to the flames, her hands trembling. There is something you don't know, she said, her voice barely above a breath. Something I should have told you from the beginning. Samuel waited, his silence steady, unflinching. I am not divorced, she said. Legally, I am still married to William Morrison, the man who left me the moment I told him I was expecting. Samuel's brow furrowed, but he said nothing. I thought it was over. I left Philadelphia with papers unsigned, believing he would file them. But no document ever arrived, no final decree, and I didn't have the strength to chase it down. I just wanted to disappear. She turned toward him now, eyes shining with guilt and something that looked like shame. I am not a widow. I am not free. I am someone else's wife, at least in the eyes of the law, and you deserve to know that before you risk everything for someone who cannot give you anything in return." The words hung in the air like frost, sharp and glinting. Samuel stepped forward until he stood directly before her. Then, without hesitation, he reached out and took her hands. Rough, calloused hands that had built a home from nothing. "You think this changes how I feel?" he said softly. She tried to pull back, but he held fast, gentle and firm. "It only makes me want to help you more." Her breath hitched. "I have seen what you've endured. I know the cost you've paid, and I see you still choosing to stand, still choosing to build. That does not make you a burden. That makes you braver than anyone I know." "I can't offer you anything," she whispered. "Not a proper future. Just this farm and silence, and a child that's not even born yet." "You offer me the truth," Samuel said. "You offer me purpose. That's more than I've had since Mary passed." She looked up at him now, truly looked. And what she saw was not pity, not charity. It was something deeper, compassion born of shared loss. The stove crackled behind them as the wind sighed against the walls. And for the first time since the world had turned against her, Eleanor felt the weight in her chest begin to shift. Not gone, but shared. Samuel's hand never left hers, and neither did his promise. Deep winter, wind stirring the bare oaks, moonlight silvering the snow-covered fields. The farmhouse stood like a defiant heartbeat in the countryside, framed by bare trees and the distant call of owls. Inside, Eleanor Sullivan sat at her work table, her hands wrapped around the carved cradle's rail, heart pounding with something she could not name. Not fear, not joy, something in between. A breath held too long. Samuel stood near the stove, his shadow stretching toward her like an unspoken promise. "You should not have come back," she said quietly. He didn't move. "You knew I would." Eleanor's eyes met his for only a moment before returning to the floor. "It doesn't matter what we feel. You know that, Samuel. We can't rewrite the rules of your church or erase judgment." "I'm not trying to rewrite anything," he answered. "I'm just trying to do what's right in God's eyes." She stood abruptly, her hands pressing to the small of her back as her belly shifted. The child inside kicked hard, as if sensing the storm beneath her skin. "You think faith will make this easier?" she snapped. "It doesn't. Faith doesn't silence gossip. It doesn't file divorce papers. It doesn't protect us from a community waiting for you to fall from grace." "I don't care about gossip," Samuel said. "You should," she flared, voice shaking. "Because it will care about you, about the Amish man choosing an English woman with a child born in scandal." Samuel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "This child is innocent, and that makes him worthy of protection and love." Eleanor felt the breath rush from her lungs. She turned away, one hand trembling as it braced against the window frame. "I've spent every night for months wondering if I was strong enough to do this alone," she whispered. "And now that someone offers to carry some of that weight, all I feel is fear." Samuel crossed the floor in silence until he stood behind her, just close enough for his warmth to reach her through the space. "Why fear it?" he asked. "Because I've loved before," she answered, barely audible. "And I was wrong. Because I believed words that turned to ash in my mouth. Because I trusted a man to stay, and he left without even asking if the child was his." Samuel's voice was low. "And now you think I'll do the same?" She didn't answer. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Eleanor," he said, "I know what it is to lose someone, to have everything you planned taken away. Mary, she was my whole world. We were planning our family, choosing names." She turned slowly, her face stricken. "When she died," he said, "I thought God had abandoned me. Every day since, I've lived like the world owed me nothing. I stopped believing in his plan for my life, in joy, in any of it." He looked at her steadily. "Until I drove past your land and saw you raising that barn like you were rebuilding the world itself." A single startled laugh broke from her throat, half sob, half disbelief. "You're not some lost woman I stumbled across," he continued. "You're the reminder I needed that God still works through broken people. And I don't want to lose that. Not because of laws I didn't write, not because of people too afraid to see his hand in unexpected places." Eleanor's hands came up, touching his wrists but not pushing him away. "I don't know how to let you in," she said softly. "I've built so many walls, I forgot where the door is." He leaned his forehead toward hers, voice breaking. "Then let me help you find it." For a moment, the world narrowed to just them. Snow outside, warmth within, and a fragile thread of hope pulling tight. "I lost my wife before," Samuel whispered, his voice full of memory and new resolve. "I won't lose you too. Not when I finally found something worth protecting." Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she did not feel alone. The sky turned the color of lead by late afternoon. Eleanor gripped the porch railing as a biting wind stirred the oaks into nervous whispers. The baby had been restless all morning, kicking low and sharp, as if it too sensed what was coming. Snow fell heavy, thick, and fast. Within an hour, the world disappeared in white. Eleanor lit every lamp, laid out towels, boiled water, her pulse pulled with dread. Then it hit her, a contraction like fire, stealing her breath, doubling her over. She clutched the table, eyes wide with pain. "Not now," she whispered. "Not like this." She was alone. Miles away, Samuel Yoder hitched his strongest horse to the buggy. The storm's turn had told him everything. She needed him. Faith and instinct screamed louder than caution. He drove into the storm, but it swallowed him. Visibility vanished. His buggy slipped on a drift and rubber turned, throwing him into a frozen ditch. Ice stole the air from his lungs. Pain lanced his shoulder. He lay there a long moment, snow settling on his beard. "She needs me," he groaned, dragging himself from the ditch. The horse and buggy by were gone, so he walked. Through waist-high snow and wind that screamed, one step at a time. At the farmhouse, Eleanor fought, screaming, bleeding. Her body burned and broke. She cried out for strength, for her father, for mercy. The storm rattled the windows. And then, a cry, raw, beautiful. Her baby, a boy. She sobbed, cradling him, kissing damp skin, whispering every prayer she'd ever known. But Samuel had not come back, and the storm was only getting worse. Fear clawed at her chest. What if he was lost? What if she had survived this moment only to lose the one man who had seen her not as a burden, but as something worth protecting? She rocked her son, tears falling silently. "You'll be safe," she whispered, "even if it's just me." A knock, faint, then again, firmer. She froze, the door opened. Samuel stood there, soaked in snow, blood on his shirt, face pale with pain. "Samuel," she gasped. He stumbled inside, dropped to his knees near the stove. Steam rose from his coat. His breath came shallow, and then he saw the baby. Their eyes met, no words. He reached out, hand trembling, brushing the tiny fist at her chest. "Looks like God's already blessed this home," he murmured. "Mind if I stay to witness it?" Her throat closed. She could have said no, should have, maybe, but instead, she shifted the baby into his arms. "Only if you're sure," she whispered. "I've never been more sure of his plan." Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, a new kind of warmth took hold. A home, a promise, a beginning neither of them had dared to dream. And this time Eleanor knew she was not alone anymore. The first sign of spring was not flowers or melting snow, but the soft give of the earth under Eleanor's boots. Mud welcomed her steps. Birds began to sing again, and the scent of fresh tilled soil warmed in the sunlight. Inside the farmhouse, the stove still burned, but warmth also came from laughter, of two people who had once known only silence. Eleanor stepped outside with a bucket in hand, her newborn son cradled against her chest in a cotton sling. Samuel knelt nearby, driving the first post for what would soon be a new addition to the barn. "This soil's soft early," he called, glancing up with a gentle smile. She smiled back. "Or maybe it knows we've got work to do." He stood, dusting off his hands. "Either way, we need more room, especially for that growing boy." They had named him Jacob. No grand declarations, just something steady and true. That afternoon, Eleanor sat at the table, signing a letter to a Philadelphia law office, her official request for divorce from William Morrison. Her hand trembled slightly as she sealed it. Samuel entered then, sawdust on his sleeves and peace in his smile. "You did it?" She nodded. last piece of the past sealed and sent. He kissed her forehead gently. I'm proud of you. God's timing is perfect. They did not celebrate with a wedding. Unyielding. Not yet. The divorce would take time, and Samuel's standing in the church remained delicate. But they shared a meal with the Miller family and a few understanding neighbors. Eleanor made pot roast. Samuel hung lanterns. When the sky turned lavender, he stood and took her hand. She is the strongest woman I've ever known, he said to their small gathering. I thought I was coming to help her, but she helped me find my faith again. Eleanor smiled softly. No rings yet, but plenty of roots. The guests nodded with understanding. Out here, among some, love was proven in daily work, not documents. A week later, Eleanor stepped outside to see Samuel finishing a new door for the chicken coop. She had asked what he was working on, but he only said to wait. Now, in the late light, she saw it, a horseshoe shaped and smoothed, mounted as the handle. Found it bent near the road, he said. Thought it was scrap, but turns out it just needed reshaping. She traced it with her fingers. Like some people, she said. He nodded. Broken things can still carry weight if they are strong enough. The wildflowers bloomed. Jacob grew. And one golden evening, Eleanor sat at her writing desk with a piece of her father's old stationery. She wrote, Dear Papa, you said once that a home was not a place but a feeling. I did not believe you then. But now I do. I built a barn, hauled wood, shaped the roof, fought storms. I did it for me and my boy. But it took a quiet Amish man with faith like yours and a heart full of grace to make it feel like home. We are not alone anymore. Of with your Eleanor. She folded the letter and placed it in the mailbox outside. Jacob laughed, his first real laugh. Samuel, fixing a fence post, looked up. Eleanor walked toward him, baby in arms, heart full. The wind carried the scent of apple blossoms and promise. Spring had come, and with it, everything she had never dared to dream. If you made it to the end of this story, if your heart clenched when Eleanor stood alone in the storm, if you saw a piece of yourself in Samuel's quiet vow, I won't lose you too, then you already understand. Love in Amish country was never given. It was built from timber, beams, and calloused hands, from sleepless nights and silent prayers, from scars no one spoke of unless someone stayed long enough to listen. If Eleanor and Samuel's journey moved you, if you believe love can survive law, loss, and snowfall, then you've witnessed something sacred. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about passion. They're about two broken people choosing to build something whole together, one beam at a time. In this valley where faith meets earth, where the English world ends and God's country begins, love doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in baskets of bread, in borrowed strength, in the patient hands of those who know that the best things, like barns, like babies, like hope itself, are raised slowly, carefully, with grace.